Welcome back. Well, let's focus again on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit this week to India. It's his first and the second by an Israeli premier. But this is a big trip for Netanyahu, who's made much of his personal relationship with his Indian counterpart, Narendra Modi, and made improving relations with the subcontinent a centerpiece of his strategy to build Israeli diplomatic and economic ties with Asia.
And for Modi, too, the visit has some deep significance, as his warm welcome for Netanyahu actually bucks decades of India's pro-Palestinian policies and risks aggravating the country's large Muslim minority. Joining us right here in the studio is Lior Weintraub. He's former spokesperson to the Israeli embassy in India and director of the Israel Project's Jerusalem office. Lior, great to have you with us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Is this about economics in your eyes or more politics?
I think it's about everything. Look, this visit is of great importance, possibly even historical one. One of the reasons for that is the fact that the previous one took place, as you mentioned, 16 years ago. 2002, Prime Minister Sharon came to Delhi, had to cut his visit short due to a terrorist attack. It was during the notorious Second Intifada. And since then, there were no visit, and it's not due to lack of attempts from the Israeli side, including myself, to bring Israeli leaders.
In times like that where you attempted to make that happen, what were you told by Indian
officials?
Well,
we got a lot of excuses and explanation. Why is it too sensitive for an Israeli leader to come and to raise the profile of the relationship? One of the time was a election on Uttar Pradesh. One of the time was an election in Israel. So there were many reasons why not to raise the profile. And today we see not just a visit, but we see that the Indian side, the host, and the Prime Minister going out of his way in order to raise the profile and to signify the warmth and the personal friendship, but also the friendship between the nations.
There's plenty of warm hugs we saw.
There was. In fact, let's take a look now at some of the comments that Prime Minister Netanyahu and Modi made today in India.
Indians and Israelis know too well the pain of terrorist attacks. We remember the horrific savagery in Mumbai. We grit our teeth, we fight back, we never give in.
In defense, I have invited Israeli companies to take advantage of the liberalized FDI regime to make more in India with our companies.
Lior, clearly, it's not fake. There is a real chemistry there between these two leaders. But I wonder, how far can it go? There was some disappointment, and the Prime Minister Netanyahu was quite frank about it, that in that vote in the United Nations on the condemning the U.S. move to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, India did vote against Israel in the United States. They could have abstained. They could have absented it in the hall. So I'm asking you, how could it go to a point where India would change its vote on something like that?
Well, first of all, diplomacy sometimes is a show. And when it's at its best, it's a good show. And today we're seeing a good show. I think that expecting that to see a complete departure from 70 years of traditional Indian diplomacy in the UN and other places was not realistic. So I think that what we're seeing now is much bigger and much bigger symbol than a UN vote. I mean, people in Uttar Pradesh, in other cities and towns in India didn't hear about the vote at the UN. But today, every Indian sees the Prime Minister of Israel sitting side by side or standing side by side with the Indian Prime Minister, and he hears about the significance of the relationship between Israel and he hears about the scope and the volume of the relationship, but more than that, he hears about the potential. And he hears about the defense cooperation, he hears about the cultural cooperation, he hears about the R&D. So these are very, very strong things. And I think that what we're seeing here is a strategic decision by the Indian government to put aside the things that Israel and India do not agree about and agree to disagree. And on the other hand, but to promote the things that both sides, both nations care very strongly about and can push the relationship in both nations forward.
On that note of disagreement and walking the very fine political line, especially between India's relationship with the Palestinians versus Israel, this is what Israel's ambassador to India told us earlier.
In anything that concerns the Middle East and Israel, nowadays there is a two-way, I would say, two parts to the foreign policy, in which the Indians state in no uncertain terms that they dehyphenate the relations between the commitment of the Indian government to the Arab world and to the Palestinian cause, I have to say, and with the will and the wish to upgrade the relations even more with Israel. Yes, there was no mention of the Palestinian issue, and it's fine.
What role, Lior, do you think that a country like India could actually play maybe for the better in those kinds of ties? Because Netanyahu seems like he doesn't want to bring it up. The issue of the lack of peace isn't really an issue, as we heard at all, on the table there in India. But could that actually be used for something positive?
So I think, first of all, that behind closed door, I think the Palestinian issue, the peace process, was part of the discussion for sure. And I think both sides can already map where each side stands and where the disagreement is. And I think that the Israeli Prime Minister also probably heard what the Indian government would like to see, what they think is the good way, what's the right approach in order to, when it comes to the peace process. But I don't think that India can play a big role when it comes to the Middle East. I think there are some remains of the non-alignment movement when it comes to the traditional Indian foreign policy, but India cares about India. And this is what we're seeing today. The Indian economy, the Indian security, and it's a very strong signal to China, to the Trump administration, to Russia, to Pakistan, and to all the rest, saying that India is going to promote its interests in the best way possible. Narendra Modi, his ticket is to, as the BJP used to say, make India shine. He needs to deliver to his people, and I think this is what we're seeing today.
In terms of economics,
in terms of economics, but also security.
And do you think that those markets, which are very tight in India, are going to be open now more to Israelis?
Look, when I was in India, they started the discussion about the FTA, Free Trade Agreement, and they said that the agreement is imminent, probably take a year. It took about 10 years. It takes about 10 years. Now they're talking about renewing it. There are many complexities when it comes to a free trade agreement between India and Israel, but there is a lot to gain. There is a win-win situation there. Just last week, I attended a speech by the President Rivlin, who talked about his discussion with his Indian counterpart, and he said that he mentioned to his Indian counterpart that together India and Israel are almost 1.4 billion. So we must cooperate. We must do things together. Israeli know-how in defense, but also in agriculture, water management, R&D is very valuable to India. And in order to approach this know-how, India know that they need to cooperate. We see more and more investments in Israel, including by Reliance. So I think the relations are on a good track.
All right, Lior Weintraub, stay right here. We're going to go for a quick break. Much more on the rundown when we're back. Don't go anywhere.
Well, welcome back to the rundown, and we're discussing Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to India. And with us in the studio is Lior Weintraub, former spokesperson for the Israeli embassy in India, now director of the Israel Project's Jerusalem office. And Lior, I just want to ask you, from your experience there in India, the attitude that you found, the general attitude toward Israelis, beyond the sort of political posturing that there may be of officials.
Well, when I got to India, I was instructed never to discuss the defense cooperation. People told me it's under the radar, extremely sensitive. On my first day, I took a taxi, and the taxi driver told me, "You're an Israeli." I said, "No, I'm not." "You're an Israeli." Okay, so if I'm an Israeli, you guys help us in the Kargil war. You saved us. So there are Indians that really appreciate Israel. They know about Israel. They read constantly about the defense cooperation. It's a national obsession. I never saw a nation that is so obsessed and so in the details of the defense cooperation. But when you go outside of Delhi, you meet and you see demonstration where Muslims are demonstrating against Israel and for the Palestinian cause. So India is vast. It's a subcontinent.
The second biggest, I think, Muslim population in the world.
180 million, probably more.
Right, after Indonesia has the largest.
So there is a fine balance there, and you can understand the Indian government why they would like to have a lot of cooperation under the table and limit the profile of the relationship, since they don't know how this relationship will be received by a large chunk of the population, about 40% of Muslims.
Okay, Lior Weintraub, thank you for joining us
Thank
today
you for having me
on the rundown.